The F-22 Raptor was dead on the flight line until a legendary veteran brought it back to life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Imagine this. You're standing on the runway, the vast, open sky above you, and you see something that shouldn't be possible. An F-22 Raptor, one of the most advanced and expensive fighter jets in the world, sits motionless on the flight line, its engines silent, its wings lifeless. The team of highly trained technicians is gathered around, their faces a mixture of disbelief and frustration. They've tried everything. They've run every diagnostic, checked every system, but the aircraft refuses to respond. The pilots, all seasoned professionals, watch with growing concern. This jet was supposed to be in the air, conducting maneuvers that only a handful of pilots could manage, but instead, it was stuck, dead on the tarmac. The young techs are at a loss, fumbling with tools and mumbling under their breath. "We need to call in a specialist," one of the senior techs finally says, but no one feels confident that anyone could fix it. The F-22 is a marvel of modern technology, and there's no room for mistakes. The team knows they are running out of time. The clock is ticking. The sun beats down on the open runway, and the once mighty F-22 now looks like a forgotten relic. Then, out of nowhere, a figure approaches. An older man, moving with quiet confidence, dressed in faded jeans and a simple shirt, carrying a battered toolbox. He's not wearing any insignia, no flashy uniform, just the kind of clothes you'd expect from a civilian who's seen better days. The technicians glance at each other, unsure of who this person is or what he could possibly do to help. One of them, a young airman, looks up at the stranger, his face filled with skepticism. "Can I help you, sir?" he asks, his voice tinged with a hint of mockery. The old man, with his weathered face and steady hands, simply looks at the F-22, then back at the tech. "I was called to help," he says calmly, his voice soft yet carrying a weight of authority. The young airman scoffs, clearly unimpressed. "You're gonna fix that?" he asks, gesturing toward the jet. "This isn't exactly a relic you're used to, old-timer." The veteran doesn't react to the jeer. Instead, he slowly walks towards the jet, his steps deliberate, focused. He doesn't even glance at the technicians. His eyes are locked on the F-22, as if it's speaking to him in a language only he can understand. He opens his toolbox, and without a word, he begins to examine the engines. His movements are precise, practiced. The techs continue to watch, a mixture of curiosity and disbelief painting their faces. The young airman, unable to resist, steps forward and asks, "You even know what you're doing?" The veteran doesn't answer. He just works, his hands moving over the jet like he's been doing it his entire life. As he checks the fuel line, a memory flashes in his mind, one that takes him back decades. He remembers working on aircraft in conditions far more dangerous than this. A time when his hands were covered in blood and sweat, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. But those days were long gone. Or so he thought. As he adjusts a small valve, he hears a faint click, the unmistakable sound of a system coming to life. The jet's lights flicker, and the sound of its engines hums faintly. The technicians stand frozen, their mouths slightly agape. For the first time in hours, the F-22 shows signs of life. The young airman steps back, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock. The old man doesn't look up. He just continues working, his hands steady, his focus unwavering. Within minutes, the jet is fully operational again, its engines roaring to life. The technicians exchange stunned looks, unable to comprehend what just happened. The veteran steps back, wipes his hands on a rag, and slowly turns to face the young airman. "It's all in the details," he says quietly. The young airman stands there, speechless, his mind struggling to process the impossible. The veteran smiles, not in triumph, but in quiet satisfaction, and walks away, disappearing into the distance, just as quietly as he came. The F-22, once thought dead, is now ready to take flight once again. Captain Henderson sat at the small diner table, staring at the old man who had so casually fixed the F-22. He had hoped to find answers, but now, faced with this calm figure who seemed to hold the key to a mystery bigger than he could grasp, the captain felt a sense of unease. The veteran's eyes, calm and knowing, locked onto his, as though he had been expecting this conversation long before it started. The air between them seemed to thicken, the weight of unspoken history hanging in the silence. Henderson couldn't shake the feeling that he was sitting in front of someone who had lived through things he would never understand. "Who are you really?" Henderson asked again, his voice quiet but firm. The veteran smiled faintly, almost as if amused by the question. "I'm just a man who knows how to get things done," he replied. His voice was calm, but there was a depth to it, a weight that made Henderson's blood run cold. The veteran didn't seem like the kind of person to boast. There was something in the way he carried himself, in the quiet strength he exuded, that made Henderson feel like he was missing something crucial. "I've seen things," the veteran continued. "Things that most people couldn't even imagine. But that's not why I'm here." Henderson leaned in, his curiosity piqued. "Then why are you here?" The veteran paused for a moment, his eyes flickering to the window, where the sun was beginning to set. "Let's just say I've been called in for a reason," he said cryptically. "And now, it's time to make sure things go right." Henderson felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had been dealing with military protocol, the strict rules and regulations, for years, but this felt different. "You said you were called in," Henderson said, trying to piece things together. "Who called you? And why didn't anyone know about you before?" The veteran's eyes softened, and for the first time, Henderson saw a flicker of something. Regret, maybe, or perhaps an old, hidden pain. "You'll find out soon enough," the veteran said, his voice low. "But I can tell you this. There's a reason they didn't teach you everything in your training. A reason they kept some things from you." Henderson furrowed his brow, trying to process what he was hearing. "What do you mean? What's going on?" The veteran leaned forward, his eyes intense now, locking onto Henderson's with an unspoken understanding. "You think you've seen everything there is to see in the military. The high-tech gear, the cutting-edge technology, the best training money can buy. But there's another side, something that most people don't know about. A world where the old ways still matter. And I'm part of that world." Henderson's heart skipped a beat. He had heard rumors, whispers in the ranks, of veterans who had lived through things that defied belief, legends who were thought to be gone, but who still carried with them the skills and wisdom that no amount of training could replace. But he had never really believed it. Now, as he sat across from this man, he wasn't so sure anymore. "Are you saying you're one of those legends?" Henderson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The veteran smiled, a thin, almost sad smile. "I'm not the one who matters," he said softly. "What matters is what's coming. And you, Captain, are going to be in the middle of it." The captain swallowed hard. He had no idea what the veteran was talking about, but something in his gut told him that whatever was coming would change everything. Just then, Henderson's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen and saw the name of his commanding officer, Colonel Roberts. The veteran noticed the shift in his demeanor, his eyes narrowing. "Go ahead, answer it," the veteran said, his voice steady. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Henderson hesitated but then picked up the phone. "Yes, sir." "Henderson, we need you back at the base," Colonel Roberts said urgently. "There's been a situation. The F-22 is up and running, but we have some questions about what happened. Get here now." Henderson felt a knot form in his stomach. "Understood, sir. I'm on my way." He hung up and stood up from the table, his mind racing. The veteran followed him with his gaze, then stood slowly, as if it took all his energy. "You're going to need more than just your training for what's coming," he said quietly. "You'll need to remember the old ways. The real ways." Henderson glanced back at the man, unsure what to say. He felt a pull, an urgency, that he couldn't explain. He didn't know it yet, but this encounter would mark the beginning of a journey into a world he never knew existed. A world where the past and present collided, and where the true power of military legacy would come to light. He walked out of the diner, the cool night air hitting his face as he made his way to his car. His mind was a whirl of questions, but one thing was clear: the veteran was right. Something big was happening, and he had no choice but to follow it. Captain Henderson's mind raced as he drove back to the base. The weight of the veteran's words echoed in his mind. unsettling him more than he cared to admit. He had spent years in the military, learning the ropes of modern warfare, cutting-edge technology, and precise strategy. But now, facing a man who spoke of old ways and legends from a time long past, he felt as if his world was beginning to unravel. As he pulled up to the gate of the base, the usual military precision and structure seemed almost foreign. He was used to everything being clear-cut, organized, and logical. Now, he was stepping into a world where those rules no longer seemed to apply. The guards at the entrance barely acknowledged him as he passed. The base felt quieter than usual, a strange tension in the air. He drove straight to the command center, his heart pounding in his chest. As soon as he entered, Colonel Roberts was waiting for him. The colonel didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We've got a situation," he said sharply. "You've heard about the F-22, I assume." Henderson nodded, his mind still on the conversation with the veteran. "Yes, sir. I've seen it. But there's something I don't understand. How did that man—" "We'll get to that," Roberts cut him off. "Right now, we need to figure out who he is and what he's doing here. This doesn't just happen. There's something bigger going on, Henderson, and I need you to help us find out what it is." The colonel's words hit like a hammer. Something bigger? Henderson felt a chill creep down his spine. He had a sinking feeling that what they were dealing with wasn't just a technical malfunction. Something had shifted, and he couldn't put his finger on it. "I've been digging," Roberts continued, walking to a wall covered in charts and maps. "We've traced some of the older records, and I'm starting to think this veteran is connected to something or someone. But I need confirmation." Henderson wasn't sure what he was hearing. This was a military base, the best of the best, yet they were talking about a mystery that went beyond the realm of anything they'd ever encountered. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Roberts turned and looked at him with a grim expression. "I need you to track down that man. Find him. We need answers, and fast." Henderson nodded. He had no idea where to start, but the veteran's cryptic words haunted him. "Understood, sir," he said, stepping back. As he turned to leave, Roberts added, "And Henderson, be careful. This goes deeper than we know. There's a reason no one's heard of him. And it's not because he's just another retired vet." Henderson's heart skipped a beat as he left the room. Something didn't sit right. The way the colonel had said those words, "be careful," rang in his ears like a warning bell. He needed to find the veteran, but he couldn't shake the feeling that finding him might uncover a truth too dangerous to handle. The base's security team was already on the lookout for the old man, but Henderson knew they needed more than just a search. They needed answers. As he walked down the hallway, his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, expecting it to be another call from command, but it was a text from someone he didn't recognize. "Meet me where it all started. You'll find the answers you're looking for. But you're not the only one who's searching." The message was brief, but it left Henderson feeling uneasy. He didn't know whether to trust it or not, but something told him this was no coincidence. The location provided in the message was a small airstrip outside of town. It wasn't far from the base, but it was rarely used. Henderson knew the area well. It was where old training exercises had been held, where forgotten aircraft had once been tested and retired. But the timing couldn't have been worse. If someone else was already looking for the veteran, it meant he wasn't the only one who had stumbled onto something big. He had no choice. He had to go. As he made his way to the airstrip, his thoughts swirled. What was the veteran's connection to the F-22? Why was he able to fix the jet when no one else could? And what was this larger conspiracy that Roberts had hinted at? He parked his car near the small runway, the night air cool against his face. The place was deserted, save for a few rusted old planes parked off to the side. Henderson's footsteps echoed on the cracked pavement as he approached the hangar. The door creaked as it slowly opened, revealing a dimly lit interior. And there, standing in the shadows, was the veteran. He looked exactly the same as he had earlier, calm, collected, and unfazed by the situation. "You came," the veteran said, his voice low and steady. Henderson couldn't help himself. "What is this? What's going on?" The veteran took a slow step forward, his eyes narrowing. "It's bigger than you think," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Much bigger. And now, you're a part of it." Henderson swallowed hard. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it was going to change everything. The veteran stepped further into the dim light of the hangar, his eyes scanning the surroundings with the calm of someone who had seen it all before. Henderson followed closely behind, his mind racing with questions, but the veteran's silence only deepened the mystery. The hangar was quiet except for the sound of their footsteps echoing off the cold concrete floor. As they reached the back of the building, the veteran stopped and turned to face Henderson. "You're looking for answers," he said, his voice steady, like he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Henderson nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I don't know what's happening, but I need to understand. This isn't just about fixing a jet. This is something much bigger." The veteran's eyes softened, a fleeting moment of understanding passing between them. "You're right," he said quietly. "It's bigger than any of us. But the truth you're seeking, it's not one that's easy to accept." Henderson furrowed his brow. "What truth?" The veteran looked around the hangar, as if checking for anyone else who might be listening. "The military, the government, they've always been good at hiding things. Things that were never meant to be found. And you, Captain, you've stumbled upon something that has been buried for decades." Henderson's mind raced. "What kind of things? What are you talking about?" The veteran paused before speaking again. "There's a reason they called you in. There's a reason you were the one who saw the F-22. It's not just about that aircraft. It's about the people who are pulling the strings. The ones who have been controlling everything from the shadows." Henderson felt a chill creep down his spine. "The strings?" he repeated, unsure of what the veteran meant. The veteran nodded slowly. "You see, Henderson, the military isn't just a force of defense. It's a tool. A tool that's been used to protect certain interests, to hide certain truths. And these truths, they go back to wars you've never been told about, operations you've never heard of." Henderson took a step forward, his voice growing more urgent. "I don't understand. What do you want from me? Why are you telling me this?" The veteran looked him squarely in the eye. "Because you're the one who's going to expose it. You're the one who has the power to stop them." Henderson's heart skipped a beat. "Stop who? What are you talking about?" The veteran's face darkened. "The people behind all of this. The ones who are using the military as a tool for their own gain. The ones who have been manipulating events, controlling the narrative, and keeping things hidden from the world. They don't want you to know the truth, Henderson. They don't want anyone to know what's really been going on." Henderson felt a knot form in his stomach. He had always thought that his work in the military was about protecting people, about keeping the country safe. But now, he was being told that there was a far darker side to everything he had ever believed. "Why me?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Why are you telling me this?" The veteran's eyes softened again. "Because you've already seen it. You've already started to uncover the truth. That's why they're coming for you." The words hit Henderson like a punch to the gut. "Who's coming for me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The veteran's gaze darkened. "The people who want to keep this buried. They'll stop at nothing to make sure no one learns the truth. And they'll do whatever it takes to silence anyone who gets too close." Henderson took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "What can I do?" The veteran stepped closer, placing a hand on Henderson's shoulder. "You've got to follow the leads. You've got to go after the people who are behind this. You've got to find out who's been pulling the strings all these years. And when you do, you'll know what to do with that knowledge." Henderson nodded slowly, the weight of the veteran's words sinking in. He had been thrust into something far bigger than he ever expected, something that threatened to shake the very foundation of everything he had believed in. "I'll do it," Henderson said, his voice firm. "I'll find out who's behind all of this." The veteran smiled, a look of approval crossing his face. "I knew you would." Just then, a sound broke the silence. Henderson turned, his hand instinctively going to the holster at his side. The veteran raised a hand to stop him. "Relax," he said, his voice calm. "It's just them." The door to the hangar creaked open, and several figures stepped into the dim light. Henderson's heart skipped a beat when he saw the faces of the men entering the room. They were military personnel, but not the kind he was used to seeing. These men were different, cold, calculating, and they moved with the precision of people who had been trained for something far more dangerous than a simple mission. The veteran stepped forward, his expression hardening. "This is where it starts," he said quietly. "You're not just fighting for answers anymore. You're fighting for your life." Henderson stood tall, his hand still resting on the grip of his weapon. The air in the hangar grew thick with tension as the men approached. This was no longer just a search for answers. It was the beginning of a fight he didn't fully understand, but one he knew he had no choice but to engage in. The door to the hangar closed with a heavy thud, the sound reverberating through the silent air. Henderson stood still, his pulse quickening as the figures in front of him moved closer. These men, their eyes cold and calculating, exuded a sense of danger that sent a chill down his spine. They weren't just military personnel. They were something more, something that felt darker, as if they had been trained for a purpose far beyond the standard operations of the armed forces. The veteran stepped forward, placing himself between Henderson and the advancing men. His posture was calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet intensity that told Henderson everything he needed to know. These men weren't here to talk. They were here to silence. "Stay behind me," the veteran murmured, his voice low but steady. Henderson didn't need to be told twice. His hand instinctively gripped the weapon at his side, but the veteran's presence seemed to hold him back, urging him to wait, to watch. The men in front of them stopped at a distance, their expressions unreadable. The leader of the group, a tall man with an immaculate uniform and 4 stars on his shoulder, stepped forward. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his voice smooth, like the calm before a storm. The veteran didn't flinch. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he replied, his tone unwavering. The tall man's lips twitched, almost imperceptibly. "You know too much," he said, his words dripping with a hidden threat. "And you're not the only one who's been looking for answers." Henderson's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a random encounter. This was a confrontation years in the making. The veteran had warned him, but he hadn't realized just how far the conspiracy reached. "I've spent my life uncovering things you don't want the world to know," the veteran continued, his voice steady. "And now, it's your turn to face the truth." The 4-star general's eyes narrowed. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he said, his voice colder now. "You think you can expose us? You think you can bring down everything we've worked for?" The veteran didn't blink. "You've had your time," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. "But now it's over." The general's lips curled into a smile, though there was no warmth in it. "It's not over. It's just beginning," he said, his hand moving to his side, where he was sure to have a weapon ready. But before he could make a move, the veteran raised his hand, signaling Henderson to stay back. "This isn't your fight," the veteran said quietly. "Not yet." Henderson wasn't sure what the veteran meant, but the words hung in the air like a warning. The general stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the old man. "You think you can stop us?" he asked, his voice now laced with contempt. "You think you can tear down everything we've built?" The veteran's response was simple, but it carried a weight that made the general hesitate. "You've built your empire on lies," the veteran said, his voice like a quiet storm. "And now, it's time for those lies to come to light." The general's face tightened. "You won't make it out of here alive," he said, his voice cold as steel. But the veteran stood tall, his back straight and his eyes unwavering. "Try me," he said. The air in the hangar was thick with tension, the sound of their breaths the only noise in the stillness. Henderson stood there, his mind reeling, trying to process everything that was happening. The men in front of him weren't just soldiers. They were part of something much larger, something sinister. And the veteran, this old man, was the key to exposing it all. The general took another step forward, his eyes locked on the veteran's face. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice low, almost menacing. "You have no idea who you're up against." The veteran didn't flinch. "I know exactly who you are," he said, his voice firm. "And I know what you've done." Henderson felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The veteran wasn't just fighting for his own survival. He was fighting for the truth, for the chance to bring down a system that had operated in the shadows for too long. And now, Henderson was caught in the middle of it. The general's face darkened, and he motioned to his men. "Take them," he ordered. The men around them moved in an instant, their movements sharp and practiced. But before they could reach the veteran, Henderson drew his weapon, his instincts kicking in. "Stay back," he warned, his voice steady. "I'm not going down without a fight." The men froze, momentarily taken aback by the sudden show of defiance. The general looked at Henderson, his expression hardening. "You don't know what you're up against," he said, his voice cold with authority. "This isn't just a fight you can win." The veteran stepped forward again, placing himself between Henderson and the men. "It's a fight we have to win," he said quietly. "For the truth, for everything that's been hidden." The general's eyes narrowed. "You're a fool," he spat, but his words didn't faze the veteran. The old man stood tall, his presence unwavering, as though the weight of the world was nothing compared to the power of the truth he carried. "We'll see about that," the veteran said, his voice firm. "We'll see who the real fools are." The tension in the hangar was palpable as the veteran stood his ground, facing down the cold, calculating men who had surrounded him. Henderson felt the weight of the situation like a pressure building in his chest. His hand gripped his weapon tighter, but the veteran's calm presence kept him from acting rashly. The general's men were trained for this, Henderson could tell. They moved with precision, like wolves stalking their prey. But there was something in the veteran's demeanor, something unspoken, that told Henderson that he wasn't backing down. The general's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you can stop us? Do you really believe you can take down everything we've built?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. The veteran's eyes narrowed, his focus unwavering. "I'm not here to take anything down. I'm here to make sure the truth comes to light," he said, his voice steady. The general's expression darkened, his patience wearing thin. "You're out of your depth. You have no idea what you're dealing with," he spat, stepping forward. The veteran didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I'm dealing with," he replied, his voice low but carrying an authority that seemed to make the room tremble. The general stopped in his tracks, his gaze locked on the old man. "You've spent your life in the shadows, hiding from the truth," the veteran continued. "And now, you think you can control everything. But you're wrong. The truth is coming for you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Henderson watched, stunned by the veteran's defiance. This was a battle for something far bigger than just military power. It was a battle for control of the narrative, for the very heart of the system that had been built on secrecy and lies. The general seemed to weigh his options for a moment, his eyes flicking to his men, then back to the veteran. "You've made a grave mistake," the general said, his voice cold and dangerous. "We don't take kindly to people who threaten our operations." "Then you shouldn't have made those operations in the first place," the veteran fired back, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The general's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. The veteran was right. Whatever had been built in the shadows had now come into the light, and it was crumbling. Henderson felt the floor beneath him shift as the realization hit him. He had been part of the system, trained to believe in its righteousness. But now, standing in the hangar with this man, he was starting to see the cracks. The general took a step back, signaling to his men. "Take them," he ordered. The soldiers moved with military precision, their eyes trained on the veteran and Henderson, but neither man flinched. As the first soldier lunged forward, the veteran reacted faster than Henderson could process. With a quick motion, the old man knocked the soldier aside, his movements swift and fluid, like someone who had spent a lifetime fighting. The soldier hit the ground with a grunt, but the veteran didn't stop. He was a blur of motion, his hands moving with the ease of someone who had mastered combat in the most unforgiving conditions. Henderson watched in awe as the veteran disarmed another soldier in an instant, sending him crashing into a stack of crates. The remaining soldiers hesitated, unsure of how to approach this man, who seemed untouchable. The veteran was unstoppable, his years of experience making him more than a match for their training. Henderson, still in shock, stood frozen, his weapon now lowered at his side. He wasn't sure what to do next. The general's expression was one of disbelief, his men now struggling to contain the veteran. But they couldn't. The veteran was too fast, too skilled, too dangerous. The general's eyes flared with anger. "Enough," he shouted. But it was too late. The veteran had already taken down 3 of his men, and the rest were retreating, no longer willing to face him. The general stepped back, his jaw clenched in frustration. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cold. "We'll finish this." But the veteran stood his ground. "No, it's over," he said, his voice calm and resolute. "You've lost. You just don't know it yet." With that, the veteran turned and walked toward the door, leaving the general and his men behind. Henderson stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of the veteran's footsteps echoed in the hangar as he walked away, a figure who had just taken down a corrupt system with nothing but his knowledge and willpower. Henderson wasn't sure what to do. His mind was still reeling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But one thing was clear, this was no longer about a battle for power. It was a battle for the truth, and the veteran had won. The general watched, fury etched on his face as he clenched his fists. But there was no going back now. The truth had come out, and it was only a matter of time before the rest of the world knew what had been hidden in the shadows for so long. The veteran had exposed the cracks, and there was no repairing the damage. The veteran's footsteps echoed in the quiet hangar as he walked away, his back straight and his pace unhurried. Henderson stood frozen, the weight of the confrontation still heavy in the air. He could hear the general's voice growing fainter, a bitter promise of things to come, but it didn't matter now. The old man had already made his mark. As the silence settled in, Henderson finally found his voice. He turned to the veteran's retreating figure. "Wait," he called out, his voice cracking the stillness. The veteran stopped, but didn't turn around. "Why did you do it?" Henderson asked, his heart racing. "Why fight them? You don't have to." The veteran paused, then slowly turned back to face him, his expression unreadable. "Because the truth doesn't go away just because you want to ignore it," he said quietly. "They've spent too long keeping people in the dark, and the longer they control the story, the more dangerous they become." Henderson felt a chill run down his spine. "But you're just one man. How can you possibly take down an entire system?" The veteran's eyes were hard, but there was a hint of sadness in them, like someone who had seen too much and knew that what lay ahead wouldn't be easy. "Because one man with the truth is far more powerful than 1,000 with lies," he replied. "They think they're untouchable, but they've made a mistake. They underestimated the one thing they could never control, the past." Henderson didn't fully understand, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just let this go. The veteran was right. This wasn't just about a single mission, a malfunctioning jet, or a personal vendetta. It was about something far bigger, something that had been buried for too long, and the veteran had just peeled back a small part of that dark history. "What happens now?" Henderson asked, stepping forward. The veteran didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced around the hangar, his eyes lingering on the F-22, the machine that had just come to life against all odds. "Now we get ready," he said. "This is just the beginning. They'll come after us. They won't stop, but we have a chance to expose everything they've been hiding." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Henderson didn't know where this path would lead, but he knew he couldn't walk away, not after seeing what he had just witnessed. The veteran was more than just a man. He was a symbol of something much larger, something that could shake the very foundations of the military-industrial complex. And Henderson was starting to understand that he had a part to play in it. "How do we do it?" he asked, determination beginning to take hold. The veteran's eyes narrowed, calculating. "We find the people who have the answers," he said. "The ones who have been hiding in plain sight. The ones who've been pulling the strings for far too long. And we expose them." Henderson nodded. "Where do we start?" The veteran's gaze shifted toward the shadows at the far end of the hangar. "There's a place. A meeting ground for those who know what's really going on. It's off the grid. Only a few people know about it. But if we can find it, we can take the next step." Henderson didn't hesitate. "I'm with you." The veteran didn't smile, but there was a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Good," he said, "because this is going to get ugly, and you need to be ready for whatever comes next." They left the hangar together, the air thick with the promise of something far greater than just a mission. The world was about to change, and they were at the center of it. As they made their way to the car, Henderson couldn't shake the feeling that the veteran had been waiting for this moment for a long time. He had been the one in the shadows, the one who knew the truth. But now, it was Henderson's turn to step into the light. The weight of it all settled over him like a storm, but there was no turning back now. The game had changed, and there was no way to predict how far this rabbit hole went. He glanced at the veteran, who seemed completely unfazed by the chaos that was about to unfold. The veteran had seen it all before, and he knew what was coming. But Henderson had no idea. He only knew one thing for certain. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it, no matter the cost. As they drove into the night, Henderson realized that everything he had known up until now had been a lie. This wasn't just about the F-22 or the military. This was about exposing the people who had controlled the narrative, who had buried the truth for decades. And the veteran was the only one who could show him the way. They were about to walk into a world of shadows, and the questions would only grow deeper from here. But Henderson was ready. At least, he thought he was. The drive felt longer than it should have, as the headlights sliced through the night, cutting through the dense darkness that surrounded them. Henderson kept his eyes on the road, his mind still reeling from everything the veteran had just shared. The weight of the truth they were chasing, the secrecy, the power behind the military-industrial complex. It was all too much to process. Yet, here they were, heading straight into the heart of it. The veteran sat beside him, eerily calm, his hands folded in his lap, as if this was just another day in the life of someone who had seen it all. Henderson glanced over at him, but the veteran remained silent, his gaze fixed on the distance. They were heading to a location the veteran had hinted at, a place where the true powers of the world operated behind closed doors. "Where exactly are we going?" Henderson asked, trying to mask the unease in his voice. The veteran didn't turn to him immediately. "A place where no one asks too many questions," he replied, his voice low but purposeful. "It's where the people who control everything hide. They know the truth. They've always known it. But it's time the world finds out." Henderson's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "And how do you know about all of this?" The veteran finally turned his head, his blue eyes locking with Henderson's. "Because I've been part of it. Not willingly, but I've been in the shadows, watching, learning. I've seen how deep it runs." Henderson didn't know how to respond. His instincts screamed to turn back, but a part of him couldn't let go. Something was pulling him forward, something in the veteran's words, in the knowledge he carried. "What exactly are we going to find when we get there?" Henderson pressed. The veteran's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "The people who think they're untouchable. The ones who've manipulated this system for decades. They think they have control, but they don't. The truth will expose them." Henderson absorbed his words, his heart pounding in his chest. The past few hours had turned his world upside down. The veteran wasn't just some old man. He was a key, a link to a hidden world, a world that was now starting to reveal itself in the most dangerous of ways. As they neared their destination, the mood shifted. The quiet night outside seemed to hold its breath, as if the world was about to witness something monumental. The veteran directed Henderson down a narrow road that wound through thick trees, the kind of road that felt intentionally isolated, like no one was meant to find it. The tension in the air grew as they turned a final corner, and the silhouette of an old warehouse came into view. It was a nondescript building, hardly the kind of place one would associate with anything important. But Henderson had learned by now that appearances were deceiving. The veteran gestured toward the warehouse. "This is it," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Inside, you'll find the people who hold the keys to everything." Henderson parked the car, and they both stepped out into the cool night air. The silence around them felt oppressive, the kind that settled deep in your bones. Henderson felt the weight of the moment, his every step taking him closer to a truth that could shatter everything he knew. The veteran led the way, his movements steady, as if he had been here 1,000 times before. Henderson followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the surroundings, every instinct screaming that they were being watched. As they reached the door, the veteran paused and turned to Henderson. "Stay close. And remember, these people will try to deceive you. Don't let them." Henderson nodded, his mind set on what was coming. The veteran opened the door with ease, and they stepped into the dimly lit interior. The air inside smelled of dust and old metal, but there was something else, something heavier, in the atmosphere. They were not alone. A figure stepped from the shadows, tall and imposing. His eyes were hidden behind dark glasses, and his posture was that of someone used to giving orders. The veteran didn't flinch. "I see you've found your way here," the figure said, his voice low but carrying an undeniable weight. The veteran didn't respond immediately, but Henderson could feel the tension between them, a silent history that neither man was willing to acknowledge. "We need answers," the veteran finally said, his voice calm but firm. The figure's lips curled into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Answers are expensive," he said cryptically. "What are you willing to pay for them?" Henderson stepped forward, his voice sharp. "We're not here to bargain. We're here to expose the truth." The figure's eyes flicked to him, a moment of quiet calculation before he spoke again. "Expose the truth?" he repeated, almost amused. "Do you have any idea what that would mean? You think the world is ready for that kind of revelation?" Henderson's chest tightened, but he held his ground. "Yes, we are. It's time the world knows what's really going on." The figure studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well, but understand this. Once you open that door, there's no going back. You'll see things you can't unsee. The world you know will crumble. Henderson's heart raced. We're ready. The figure stepped aside, gesturing toward a room deep in the warehouse. Then come inside. The truth is waiting. They entered the room, and Henderson's breath caught in his throat. Before them was a massive table covered in files, blueprints, and photographs. This was the heart of the operation, the place where everything came together. And in that moment, Henderson realized that there was no turning back. They were about to uncover the secrets that had been buried for decades, and whatever came next would change everything. The room was colder than Henderson expected, the walls lined with files, blueprints, and photographs. He stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of the situation. Everything he had thought he knew was about to be turned on its head. The veteran stepped ahead, his eyes scanning the room with the familiarity of someone who had been here before. He reached for a stack of files and flipped through them with practiced ease. "This is where it all begins," the veteran said quietly. "The real story. The one they've kept hidden for so long." Henderson moved closer, his eyes falling on the files. There were names, dates, and codes, things that meant nothing to him, but clearly held the key to unraveling the conspiracy that had been buried deep within the military-industrial complex. The veteran stopped at a photograph, his fingers resting on the edge of the image. It was a grainy shot of a military operation, taken from a distance, but there was something about it that felt off. "What's this?" Henderson asked, stepping forward. The veteran's voice dropped lower, a note of regret in it. "This is one of many operations they don't want the world to know about. These are the things that don't make the official reports. These are the missions that were erased, the people who disappeared without a trace." Henderson stared at the photo, the pieces starting to come together. "They erased them?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The veteran nodded, his expression grim. "They erased the truth, along with the people who knew it. They're trying to make sure no one remembers what really happened. But it's all here. It's all in these files." Henderson reached for one of the documents, his fingers trembling as he turned the page. The words on the paper didn't make sense at first. Names, codes, classified operations, nothing that seemed relevant to the world he had known. But then he saw something that stopped him cold. The name of a high-ranking official, someone he recognized, someone he had trusted. This person," Henderson said, his voice faltering. "They were involved in this." The veteran didn't answer immediately. He just nodded, his face hardening. "They've been involved in everything. The people pulling the strings, the ones who control the narrative, they're at the top. And they've been there for a long time." Henderson felt a lump form in his throat. The shock was settling in now, creeping through him like ice. He had trusted these people, believed in the system that had trained him, that had shaped his life. And now, he was discovering that it was all built on lies, on manipulation. "What do we do now?" Henderson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The veteran didn't hesitate. "We take it all down," he said firmly. "We expose them for who they really are. All of it. The operations, the cover-ups, the lies. We bring it all into the light." Henderson nodded slowly, the weight of the task pressing down on him. He had always been trained to follow orders, to do what he was told. But now, for the first time, he was faced with a choice. A choice to stand up and do what was right, even if it meant going against everything he had believed in. "How do we do it?" Henderson asked. The veteran turned to him, his eyes piercing, unwavering. "We start with the people who are still in power, the ones who think they can control everything. We take them down, one by one, until the truth is out. And then, the world will finally see who they really are." Henderson swallowed hard. The road ahead was dark and uncertain. He had no idea what would happen once they started. But there was no turning back now. He had already seen too much. The truth was out there, hidden in plain sight, and it was time for the world to know. "Let's do it," Henderson said, his voice steady now. The veteran gave a small nod, and for the first time, a glimmer of a smile crossed his face. "Good. You're ready." They spent the next several hours going through the files, carefully documenting everything they could find. The veteran was meticulous, his focus unwavering as he pieced together the puzzle of operations, names, and events that had been hidden from the world. Henderson followed his lead, the shock of everything still fresh in his mind, but slowly turning into a fire that burned with determination. They couldn't let this go. Too many lives had been affected, too many lies had been told. and they were going to make sure those lies were exposed. As they finished compiling the information, the veteran turned to Henderson. "It's time," he said simply. Henderson stood up, his mind already racing with the next steps. "We have to get this out to the right people," he said, his voice firm with resolve. The veteran nodded. "Exactly. And then, when they start to see the truth, it won't be so easy to stop us." Henderson's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that what they were about to do wasn't just a mission, it was a revolution. The world was about to change, and they were the ones who would make it happen. With the files in hand, they left the warehouse, stepping into the night, knowing that what lay ahead would test them in ways they couldn't predict. But one thing was certain, they weren't backing down. Not now. Not ever. They moved quickly through the darkened streets, their destination set in stone. Henderson's hands gripped the steering wheel as the weight of what they had uncovered pressed heavily on his chest. The veteran sat beside him, calm as ever, his eyes focused on the road ahead, but Henderson could feel the gravity of the situation in every second of silence. They had the evidence now. The files were secured, the truth within their hands. But the more Henderson thought about what was coming next, the more he realized that this was only the beginning. The world they were about to shake was far bigger than the files they'd found, and the people who controlled it weren't going to let go easily. "You ready for this?" the veteran asked, his voice calm, but with an edge of something else, something like determination. Henderson glanced over, his eyes narrowing with resolve. "I have no choice," he said. "This has to come out. We can't turn back now." The veteran nodded. "I knew you'd say that." They reached the location, an old, unassuming building on the outskirts of town. It was a place where things were supposed to be kept quiet, tucked away from prying eyes. But it was the perfect place for what they needed to do. Henderson parked the car, the engine's hum fading into the night air. The veteran didn't say anything as they got out and moved toward the door. They were about to give the information to the right people, people who could use it to expose everything that had been hidden for so long. But even with all the preparation, Henderson's stomach twisted. The more he learned, the more he realized just how deep the conspiracy went. This wasn't just about corruption. This was about the very foundation of the system, the kind of power that controlled everything without anyone ever realizing it. "Once we give this out, there's no going back," Henderson said quietly, his eyes scanning the empty street. "I know," the veteran replied, his voice steady. "But sometimes, you have to break the system before you can fix it." They entered the building, the door creaking closed behind them. The room inside was small, filled with monitors and technology Henderson wasn't familiar with. But the people inside knew exactly what they were doing. There were no questions, no need for small talk. The veteran walked forward, handing over the files to a man sitting at a table in the center of the room. The man didn't speak at first, his eyes scanning the documents quickly, methodically. "This is the real deal," he said finally, looking up with a nod of approval. "You've done it. You've brought us what we need." Henderson felt a wave of relief wash over him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he had the sense that they were about to make a difference. The truth was about to be exposed. The lies would finally be unraveled. But that relief was short-lived. The man's eyes narrowed. "But you know," he said slowly, "this is just the beginning. Once this hits, there's going to be hell to pay." The veteran stepped forward, his eyes meeting the man's. "We've already been paying for far too long," he said, his voice low. "It's time to make them pay." Henderson looked between the two men, feeling the weight of the moment settle back into his chest. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. This was about changing the world. "What happens now?" Henderson asked, his voice uncertain. The man at the table stood up, moving toward a set of cabinets and opening one to reveal a set of encrypted communication devices. "Now," he said, "we send this to the right channels. The public has to know, but we also need to protect ourselves. This isn't just a simple leak. We're exposing the very people who control everything, and they won't go down quietly." Henderson's heart raced. He hadn't fully realized the danger they were in until now. This wasn't just about a fight for the truth, it was a fight for survival. The veteran seemed to sense his unease. "We've been preparing for this," he said, his voice reassuring but firm. "We've been in the shadows long enough. Now it's time for them to feel the heat." The man at the table placed the communication device on the table, his fingers moving quickly over the controls. "Once we send this out, we'll be on their radar. We need to be ready for what comes next. Henderson's mind raced. What came next? A part of him wanted to back out, to walk away and pretend none of this ever happened. But the other part, the part that had seen too much, that had heard the truth and couldn't forget it, knew he couldn't walk away now. We're in this together, Henderson said, more to himself than anyone else. The veteran gave him a small, approving nod. That's right, he said, and we'll see it through to the end. As the man began to transmit the information, Henderson couldn't shake the feeling that everything they had just set in motion was going to change the world in ways they couldn't possibly predict. But as the veteran had said, there was no going back. The truth had to come out, and they were the ones who were going to make sure it did. The weight of the moment pressed down on Henderson as the man at the table finalized the transmission. It was done now. The information was out, sent into the world. But as the last flicker of the screen faded, the air in the room seemed to tighten, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The veteran stood beside him, his eyes scanning the quiet room, his posture unshaken. We've done it, Henderson said, his voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and relief. But the veteran didn't share his relief. He didn't smile, didn't react. Instead, he simply nodded, his gaze still fixed on the monitors. It's only just begun, he replied, his voice steady but laced with a hard truth. Henderson felt a chill. What now? He asked, his voice dropping. The veteran turned to him, his expression unreadable. Now we wait. And we prepare. Henderson furrowed his brow. For what? The veteran's lips curled into a slight smile, but it wasn't a reassuring one. For the response, he said quietly. For everything that's coming. The reality of the situation hit Henderson all at once. The information they had sent out wasn't just a small leak. It was a revelation that could bring down powerful people, expose dark secrets that had been buried for decades. They were no longer just exposing a conspiracy. They were igniting a storm that could tear everything apart. Henderson's thoughts raced. Do you think they'll come after us? The veteran didn't hesitate. Absolutely, he said, his voice steady and cold. The people we've just exposed won't just let this slide. They'll fight back, and they'll stop at nothing to make sure the truth stays buried. The room seemed to grow colder, the silence pressing in. Henderson could feel the gravity of the situation. This was no longer just about uncovering a secret. They had just thrown a stone into a pond, and the ripples were about to become waves. What should we do? Henderson asked. The veteran looked at him, his eyes sharp and calculating. We prepare for what's coming. We don't sit and wait to be attacked. We take action. Henderson felt a surge of determination. What kind of action? The veteran reached into his coat and pulled out a small, nondescript device. It was a communication tool, something designed for covert use. We get the right people on our side, he said. We've just lit a fire, and we need to make sure it burns bright enough to expose everything. The people who are behind this, they've been controlling the narrative for too long. Now, it's time for them to lose that control. Henderson nodded, the resolve in his chest hardening. He was no longer just a bystander. He was a part of this. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. The veteran pressed a button on the device, and the screen flickered to life. We'll need allies, the veteran said as he began typing quickly. People who are outside the system, people who can help us get this out into the open. We can't do it alone. Henderson stood by, watching as the veteran worked. He didn't fully understand the complexity of what was happening, but he understood one thing. They were in this together. What's our next move? Henderson asked. The veteran's eyes locked onto his. Our next move is to make sure we're not the only ones who know the truth. We reach out, connect with the people who can make this public, and we do it fast. Henderson's pulse quickened. He knew that getting the right people involved would be difficult. The people they were up against didn't play fair. They had power, resources, and connections that could make things disappear without a trace. But now, with the truth in their hands, they had the upper hand. Let's get started, Henderson said, the words leaving his mouth with a confidence he didn't know he had. The veteran nodded and handed him the communication device. You're the key now, he said. This is your fight just as much as it is mine. Henderson took the device, the weight of responsibility sinking in. He knew that once they took the next step, there would be no going back. But he wasn't afraid anymore. The truth had to come out, and he was going to make sure it did. The veteran watched him for a moment, then turned back to the screen. We move fast. We can't give them time to react. The longer we wait, the stronger they get. Henderson nodded and activated the device. The message was simple. The truth is out. Help us expose the people who've been hiding it. The message was sent. They waited. Henderson's heart was in his throat. Would it work? Would anyone answer? The veteran didn't speak as the minutes ticked by, but his gaze never left the screen. It was almost as if he was waiting for something. Waiting for confirmation that their actions would lead to something bigger. A few moments passed, and then the device beeped. The screen flickered. A message popped up. We're in. Meet us in the usual spot. Henderson felt a wave of relief flood through him. They had allies, people who could help them make the world see the truth. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The veteran gave a small, satisfied nod. It's starting, he said quietly. Now we see how far it goes. The night had settled in thick, wrapping the city in shadows, but inside the safe house, the light was stark and cold. Henderson stood beside the veteran, both watching the screen, the weight of everything they had done pressing down on them. The message had been sent, the allies had responded, and now the stage was set. The veteran's eyes were steely, unwavering, as he observed the list of contacts they had made, each one a potential ally in this fight for the truth. But Henderson could feel the tension building in the air. The wheels were turning, and soon, there would be no turning back. You ready? The veteran asked, his voice a calm contrast to the storm of thoughts racing through Henderson's mind. I'm ready, Henderson replied, his voice steady. But as he said it, he couldn't shake the feeling that what they were about to do would change everything. The truth was out there, but the people in power weren't going to let it go quietly. And there were still those who would do anything to keep it buried. The veteran turned to him, meeting his gaze with a look that conveyed both confidence and caution. Once we step into the light, they'll come for us. They'll try to stop us, try to discredit everything we've worked for. But we have one thing they don't. We have the truth, and that's more powerful than anything they can throw at us. Henderson nodded, his grip tightening around the small device in his hand. They were about to make the final move, one that would send the information out to the right people. They had gathered everything they needed, exposed the most powerful figures in the system, and now, it was time for the world to see it. But in the back of Henderson's mind, the question remained. What would happen after the truth was out? Would it spark a revolution, or would they be crushed under the weight of those they had exposed? The veteran's calm demeanor was a stark contrast to Henderson's racing thoughts. But he wasn't afraid. He was more determined than ever to see this through. We've come too far, the veteran said, his voice low and resolute. Now it's time for them to face the consequences. It's not just about exposing the truth. It's about giving the people a chance to fight back. Henderson felt the weight of the words settle in. This wasn't just about them anymore. It wasn't even about the military-industrial complex. It was about something far bigger, the chance for everyone to see what was hidden from them and to make their own decisions about it. The veteran's eyes flicked toward the screen again. This is it, he said, stepping toward the desk where the device was placed. Henderson followed him, his pulse quickening. They had made the choice. They had uncovered the conspiracy. Now it was time for the world to know. The veteran turned to him one last time before activating the device. This will change everything. Are you ready to live with the consequences? Henderson paused for a moment, the gravity of the decision weighing on him. He had no doubt that they were about to change the world, but the question was, would the world be ready for it? Would they be able to handle the truth? I'm ready, he said finally, his voice steady. The veteran nodded, his face hardening. Then let's make it count. With that, the veteran pressed the button. The room fell silent as the device hummed to life. The truth they had fought so hard to uncover was now in the hands of the people who could expose it. Henderson watched as the screen displayed the final confirmation. Everything had been sent. The veteran turned to him, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. It's done, he said simply. Henderson felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was short-lived. He knew that the real battle was just beginning. The truth was out, but the fight for justice would be a long and difficult one. The room seemed to grow quieter, the weight of what they had just set in motion settling in. Henderson felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked up to see the veteran's calm gaze. This is just the beginning, Henderson, the veteran said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen it all before. We've taken the first step. Now, we see who else is ready to take the next. Henderson nodded, a renewed sense of purpose filling him. The world had changed in that moment, and he was ready to fight for it. They had exposed the truth, but the journey ahead was uncertain. Would they be able to survive the storm they had created? The veteran seemed to know what was coming, and yet there was no fear in his eyes, just the quiet certainty that this fight was worth it. And for the first time in a long while, Henderson felt the same way. He knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but it was a road worth walking. The veteran turned toward the door. "Let's get moving," he said. "The world won't wait for us to catch up." As Henderson followed him out, the weight of what they had just done still heavy in his chest, he knew that the truth was now in motion. And no matter what came next, he would be ready to face it. They had exposed the lies, and now, the world would have to confront them. There was no turning back. In this emotional story, we follow a veteran and a young military officer as they uncover a dangerous conspiracy that has been hidden for decades. Their journey is filled with shocking revelations and tense moments, making it a gripping emotional story of truth and justice. As they race against time to expose the dark secrets, they must face powerful enemies who will stop at nothing to protect the lies that have shaped the system. This emotional story takes the characters through a series of difficult decisions and dangerous encounters, highlighting the strength and determination needed to fight for what is right. The emotional story explores the deep emotional toll that comes with uncovering the truth and the personal sacrifices made along the way. With each twist and turn, this emotional story captivates the audience, leading them to a final confrontation that will change the world forever. Don't miss this unforgettable emotional story filled with suspense, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice.